My name is Daniel, and I've always been fascinated by the unexplained. As an amateur paranormal investigator, I've spent years exploring haunted locations across Canada. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the small town of Silver Creek, British Columbia. I first heard about Silver Creek from a friend who knew about my interest in the supernatural. He told me about a secluded cabin deep in the woods, rumored to be haunted by a demonic entity. Intrigued, I packed my gear and set out for Silver Creek, determined to uncover the truth. The drive to Silver Creek was uneventful, but as I approached the town, I felt a growing sense of unease. The dense forest surrounding the town seemed to close in on me, and the air grew colder. By the time I arrived at the trailhead leading to the cabin, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the landscape. I gathered my equipment, a digital recorder, EMF meter, thermal camera, and flashlight, and began my hike into the woods. The trail was narrow and overgrown, and the deeper I went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt as if the forest was watching me, waiting for something. After about an hour of hiking, I reached the clearing where the cabin stood. It was an old, weathered structure, its wooden walls darkened by age and neglect. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung slightly ajar. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever lay inside, and stepped over the threshold. The interior of the cabin was dark and musty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and dust covering every surface. I set up my equipment, placing the recorder on a rickety table and turning on the EMF meter. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. As I began to explore the cabin, I heard faint whispers, like the murmur of voices just beyond the edge of hearing. I strained to listen, but the whispers were indistinct, impossible to understand. I pulled out my thermal camera and scanned the room, but saw nothing unusual. I decided to try and communicate with whatever presence might be in the cabin. "If there is anyone here, please give me a sign," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. For a moment there was only silence. Then the EMF meter began to spike, the needle jumping erratically. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I switched on my digital recorder and asked again, "Who are you? What do you want?" The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and a cold breeze swept through the cabin. I heard a low guttural growl, and the air grew heavy with a sense of malevolence. My flashlight flickered, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I reviewed the recordings later that night, my hands trembling. The recorder had captured the whispers, but they were still unintelligible. However, one word stood out clearly amid the static: demon. Determined to uncover more, I returned to the cabin the next day. The atmosphere was even more oppressive, and I could feel the malevolent presence watching me. As I set up my equipment, I noticed strange symbols carved into the wooden walls, symbols I hadn't seen the night before. I pulled out my notebook and began to sketch the symbols, hoping to research them later. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and the temperature plummeted. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the cutting through the darkness, but saw nothing. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was tall and shadowy, with eyes that seemed to glow with an inner fire. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, and the figure began to move toward me. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed my gear, stumbling toward the door. As I reached for the handle, the figure lunged at me, its hands outstretched. I felt a searing pain in my chest, as if my very soul were being torn apart. I managed to wrench the door open and fled into the woods, the demonic entity's growl echoing behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my heart pounding and my breath coming in ragged gasps. I drove away from Silver Creek as fast as I could, vowing never to return. The encounter left me shaken, but also more determined than ever to uncover the truth about the supernatural. I spent weeks researching the symbols I had found, discovering that they were ancient sigils used to summon and bind demonic entities. It seemed that someone had intentionally summoned the demon to the cabin, and it had been trapped there ever since. As I delved deeper into the history of Silver Creek, I uncovered a chilling story. In the late 1800s, a group of settlers had established a small community near the creek. Among them was a man named Jacob Thompson, a reclusive and eccentric figure, known for his interest in the occult. According to local legend, Jacob had conducted dark rituals in the cabin, seeking to summon a powerful demon to grant him immortality. The rituals had gone horribly wrong, resulting in Jacob's death and the demon becoming bound to the cabin. The settlers, terrified by the events, had abandoned the area, leaving the cabin to decay. Over the years, the story had faded into obscurity, but the demon remained, waiting for someone to awaken it. Determined to put an end to the demon's reign of terror, I reached out to a renowned demonologist named Dr. Elizabeth Monroe. She agreed to help me, and we devised a plan to banish the demon once and for all. Armed with ancient texts and powerful rituals, we set out for Silver Creek. Returning to the cabin was one of the most harrowing experiences of my life. The forest seemed even more oppressive, and the sense of malevolence was palpable. Dr. Monroe and I set up our equipment and began the ritual, chanting in ancient tongues and drawing protective symbols around the cabin. As we performed the ritual, the temperature dropped, and the whispers returned, louder and more menacing than ever. The demon appeared, its fiery eyes burning with hatred. It lunged at us, but the protective symbols held it at bay. Dr. Monroe continued the chant, her voice unwavering. The demon roared in fury, its form flickering as if caught in a storm. I felt the ground tremble beneath me, and the air grew thick with the scent of sulfur. With one final incantation, Dr. Monroe completed the ritual. The demon let out a deafening scream, and his form disintegrated into a cloud of black smoke. The cabin shook violently, and the symbols on the walls glowed with a brilliant light. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos ceased. The cabin was still, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The demon was gone, banished to whatever dark realm it had come from. Exhausted but relieved, Dr. Monroe and I left the cabin and made our way back to my car. The forest seemed different now, lighter and more peaceful. As we drove away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The demon of Silver Creek was no more, and the town could finally be free from its dark legacy. The experience left a lasting impact on me. I continued my work as a paranormal investigator, but I approached it with a newfound respect for the forces I encountered. The encounter with the demon had shown me the true power of the supernatural, and I knew that some mysteries were best left unsolved. But despite the danger, I couldn't deny the thrill of the unknown. The world is filled with hidden secrets and unseen forces, and I was determined to uncover as many of them as I could. The demon of Silver Creek had been a formidable foe, but it had also ignited a fire within me, a burning desire to seek out the truth no matter the cost.